So we do have, for those of you that are already starting to join on Facebook, thank you so much for joining us. We are just waiting for Dr. Mao. He's wrapping up with a patient, and we have Chris Shelton on with us now. And we'll be getting started in a few minutes. So go grab a cup of tea, get yourself relaxed, and we'll get things underway. I do see that some of you are on Zoom as well, and thank you for joining us. For all of you, regardless of whether you're on Facebook or on Zoom, you do have the ability to submit questions. What I would like to do, please, is have you submit your questions sooner rather than later. And Leah Jonas, who is our operations director, she'll be moderating on Facebook. I can see questions in our chat box. And we will spend the last 15 minutes of this episode answering questions. So please always feel welcome to start sending your questions now. We're very much the more the merrier for questions, right, Chris?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The whole idea is empowering people to help them understand these sequences. So
exactly. Okay. So we'll get underway in just a minute, everyone. Aha. Welcome back, Dr. Mao. Okay. Why don't let's turn the music off now then. And then, Dr. Mao, I need you to unmute and we will get things underway.
There, okay. There we go. That's
okay.
Good, all right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to do a quick introduction, everyone, so that we can have that as the beginning of the video footage that we archive. So give me just a moment here. Welcome to a very special episode that we are doing tonight with Dr. Mao from, of course, our Tao Wellness Clinics, as well as with Chris Shelton. This episode is based on the topic of the 5 element cycles, and this has been a much requested chat that we do. So it's very fortunate to have both Chris as well as Dr. Mao joining us. Just to give you a bit of background on this, the 5 element theory originated thousands of years ago from observations of patterns in the natural world. Ultimately, these observations formulated a foundation through which the ancient Chinese mapped a cycle of nature to demonstrate that the interaction and relationships within the universe are only harmonious when kept in balance. This continuous cycle is easy to view in the successive flow of the seasons: spring, summer, late summer, autumn, and winter. Likewise, nature's cycles are reflected in the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Just as these phases map out predictable patterns in nature, so can they also be used as a healing framework to recognize imbalances in your body, mind, emotions, and spirits, and to heal them. Each of the 5 elements stands independently. However, each also influences and molds the others. We need the presence of these 5 elements to thrive and feel healthy. It's a dance of sorts, creating an interplay of 4 energy cycles: generating, controlling, insulting, and weakening. Thus, the 5 elements theory is extremely rich, and because this cornerstone is part of many of our Chinese practices, including medicine, the martial arts, and feng shui, we wanted to be able to share this with you tonight. So I hope you're ready, and let's get this underway. A huge welcome again to Dr. Mao for joining us, and to Chris Shelton. For those of you that are not familiar with our co-host, Chris Shelton, he is a certified practitioner and teacher with 18 years of clinical experience in Qi Gong, an ancient holistic health modality that combines traditional Chinese medicine with movement, breath, and visualization. He's helped thousands of people around the world reclaim their health and enjoy lives free from chronic pain. He's the founder of Morning Crane Healing Arts Center in San Jose and Burbank, California, and the author of Qigong for Self-Refinement. Chris is also a longtime follower for us with Tao Wellness, and he's been involved in many different activities. So it's a pleasure to bring both Dr. Mao and Chris together and be able to share this next hour with you all. We will leave time in the last 15 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, and you are on Facebook, we have Leah Jonas, our operations director, moderating our Facebook video channel, and she can take your questions and pass them over to us. And if you're on Zoom, you have a chat box, so please feel welcome to use that. And I will be watching for your questions so that we can respond to them later in the event. So gentlemen, let's get this underway. Dr. Mao, can we start with you by, sharing with us what is meaningful about us coming together today to have this chat?
Well, first of all, thank you, and thanks, Chris. Very good to see you, and thanks, Tiffany, for hosting. Um, I think the objective, what we like to see, is to have people have a deeper understanding of the five elements and how they play in benefiting, or actually, if you don't, sort of if you don't understand how to leverage his powers, you might inadvertently sort of find yourself at a disadvantage, both health and in your life. Because this five element theory, it's really not just a theory per se, it's based on practical experience. It's the phenomenons of the world. And it's called a cycle because it's repeatable. And so we see it in our lives. And to have a deeper understanding of what five element cycle is and how they play in health and wellness and living a successful, happy, fulfilling life is really fundamental, right, to all that we want. And for those people who are piping in maybe for the first time, as far as like what is this five elements? Well, you also get an overview of what it is. And so our hope is that the take home is that people will find more benefit, more practical applications on how they can translate this understanding of the framework of the cycles, the five element cycle, in every aspect of their lives.
Okay, thank you. And Chris, tell us a little bit more about you, please. What drew you to Qigong as a practitioner, and why did you want to join Dr. Mao today in explaining more about the five element theory?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Mao, for agreeing to have this conversation with me. Yes, I've been a huge fan and follower of the D family traditions for many years now, for over probably about 26 years now. And also thank you so much, Tiffany and Parisa, for putting this all together. My beginning or introduction with Qigong, I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. I had serious health issues. And then after a serious event that had come up, I had finally, by age 18, put myself into Taekwondo because I realized that the path that I was leading, I was going to end up dead in prison or both. And so one night before a match, because I started competing right away, I received a serious back injury, which led me to a doctor who had a therapist working for her at the time who was a martial artist, and started to talk to me about Qi. And back then, I'm 18 years old. In Taekwondo we called it Qi, but Qi, the way he was talking about it, the closest identifier I get to Qi was like cheese and cheese whiz, because that's all I lived on, really. Anyways, I had other health issues, and so I had nothing else to lose. And so I started taking these classes, and this was over 26 years ago. I had severe digestive problems. I had severe sinus problems. I lived on antibiotics, medications. I would eat something, then an hour or so later, I'd be nauseated or sick. And I kid you not, after about 6 months of doing these practices daily and making it into an hour to 2 hours a day of practice, I can't tell you exactly when, but there's this realization that all those symptoms went away. And so there's this awakening of, well, when I couldn't tell you exactly when it went away, but I just had the realization that, when I stopped living on the antibiotics, when I stopped living on the Sudafed, the Actifed, those types of things. And so I thought if a gentle movement and guided meditation, which is far deeper, I think, than just mindfulness. Mindfulness is a good step in the right direction. If something like that could create that much change inside my body, then there must be something to Chinese medicine. And then from there, that's when I started studying the foundations and such of Chinese medicine. And the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with Dr. Mao today is because I've done his Infinity workshops. He talked about the five healths, and the family is so creative and clever to come out with a whole herb line and other products to support our element typology. And my Qigong teacher training course that we have online, level 1 and level 2, is based upon the five elements. And within that, it's not just teaching the people that are taking the class to teach them a movement or meditation just because it feels good. Like I tell them, relaxation is just a byproduct, but to start to introduce them to the very, very basic fundamental theories of Chinese medicine in a way that they could understand. So that way, when discord shows up in their life, whether health or in their outside environment, then they can start to understand what's going on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that studying foundational Chinese medicine textbooks, is so interesting that there's so many ways to describe the same thing. For example, I'm used to excess and deficient conditions, but then there's some authors that will come up with replete and deplete, which is very clever. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed is that because we use Tao, the Subtle Universal Law, for the level 2, we use Dr. Mao's book on the 5 healths for level 1, but in the level 2 program we use Tao, the Subtle Universal Law, and students were asking me, because in the cycles, the creative or generating cycle was the same, but then when I had in my book controlling sequence, and then Master Ni had destructive sequence for the controlling sequence, and then for the destructive cycle, which is the counterclockwise rotation of the 5 elements, then is called the competitive cycle. So I thought it'd be great to get clarity on that as well too.
Okay, terrific. So let's do this. Why don't we start first? Because I absolutely want to ensure there's time for Dr. Mao to completely, have this discussion with you. Just to get things set up a little bit, Dr. Mao, coming from 38 generations of Chinese medicine, I think it would be really helpful if you can explain to those, because we have many participants actually already on Zoom as well as Facebook, and we don't know what their backgrounds are or how much they know about the 5 element teachings. So maybe you can explain this from the perspective of somebody who knows nothing about the 5 elements and these different cycles, and give them some insight on that, and then we'll move forward from how that can be applied to an individual's daily life and launch into these other aspects.
All right. Well, Tiffany, good question. There are many ways to explain the 5 elements, and I would use simple correspondences that we experience in life. What we're talking about is actually phases of transformation. So sometimes even using the term element makes us static, right? And because we go wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. So it's a kind of a finite, static state. But what we're really talking about is cycles of transformation and change that goes from one into the next. And using the terminology of these 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, to represent a temporal state of being, in which then is changeable. And so I think people need to really first understand that's a framework in which to interpret the cycles in life that we experience. And the seasons are the most obvious thing that we experience. And you had mentioned earlier about the spring, summer, late summer, fall, and winter, and how distinct seasons are not static, because at some point they change and evolve into the next season and the next season. And even before you get into the next season, let's say, for example, summer solstice, right? Mm-hmm. That's still smack in the middle of summer, right? When June 21st comes along, it's the summer solstice, and we're still out there barbecuing, having a great time, going to the beach, and it's hot. But you'll notice that as soon as the summer solstice is over, the following days begin to not only get shorter, right? Because that's the zenith. Mm-hmm. So the days start to get shorter. And it may be subtle in the beginning, but you could feel just a little bit of cooling trend happening a little bit, or it's starting to get kind of damp. And, the late summer, Indian summer is upon us. And then towards, the August months, then you start to get more moisture, and it rains in a lot of places. And so, again, we see the transitions, we see the movement and change. And so So the five element, first and foremost, outside of you, use it as a way to understand the interplay of the seasons and the interrelationships of each. And if you understand how one season moves into another, and there are, opportunities and vulnerabilities that we see in nature that change, we'll also see them in our body as well. Especially health-wise. And so we'll notice that in the summertime, when it's really hot, and summer is characterized by fire element. And that fire element, besides feeling very, very hot, and so you will get dehydrated, your face will turn red, you get thirsty, you tend to be much more physically active because that's the natural energy that propels you forward. But as you are then moving from that fire element into the late summer, that dampness, that rain, that moisture starts to set in a little bit. And that's the earth element. And we also see what's happening is that all this luxuriant growth during the summer is now getting ready to be harvested, the earth, right? The harvest is happening or it's upon us. And so now in the earth element, your activity level is not going to be the same as the summer. Now you start to feel heavier. You start to, maybe experience some more digestive issues. This is when food poisoning happens a lot, because when dampness sets in and there's more moisture and more humidity, you have the making of more infectious agents such as parasites, bacteria, and yeast, fungus, and fermentation start to happen more. And so that affects your digestion first and foremost very quickly. So again, there are changes that's outside of you, that's upon you, and then you experience a change in response to the seasons. And so if you understand each of these elemental characteristic and cycles, it can really help you, sort of preemptively prevent disease, as well as adapt to those changes and to then recover quickly if you do find yourself out of balance. And it's all about balance, right? Because after all, the reason why we talk about the five elements is to be able to understand it, leverage its knowledge, and then to use it so that we can maintain balance at all times and adapt to the changes. That way we don't get sick, that we can actually ride the crest of the wave as opposed to being on the bottom of the wave and being swept away.
Okay, thank you. Chris, do you have anything specific that you'd like to add to that? Maybe you can talk more about, like, in the modern times of where we're at now, how from your perspective this is very relevant.
Yes, because in my clinical practice, we see it all the time. And what Dr. Mao is talking about, those transitional phases, is the foundation of Chinese philosophy period, which is yin and yang theory. And really the five elements are just an extension of yin and yang theory. And that, but I think when you talk about the five elements, like what Dr. Mao was just saying, is not to get caught up on the terminology of wood, fire. Is the characteristics that we're looking at. Because if you understand the characteristics, and there's yin and yang characteristics to each of the five elements, but if you understand what the characteristics, like wood is like the time, if we talk about a life cycle, for example, wood would be considered, was that lesser yang. So it would be considered the time when the sprout, the new sprout breaks through the earth, right? Or your life first starts, right? Summertime would be at the height of our life. The metal element would be the time where things start to return back. And then the water element reflects when things go back to the earth, right? So it's not getting caught up in the terminology of wood, fire, earth, water, metal, but really understanding that it's what their functionality is what we're looking at. And what's great about that is then you could actually apply it then to the function of the internal organs, to the seasons, to when astrology, to feng shui, to assessment, diagnosis, and nutrition and herbology.
Thank you. So Dr. Mao, perhaps what we can do is let's go into more of these unique aspects, particularly for where we're at right now in this time of year.
So the fall is upon us, and and what fall is corresponds to the metal element in the cycle of 5 elements. And metal has this particular energy that, if you pay attention to it, right, just the actual visual of it, it's like a sharp tool, right? It's a tool. It's got that hardness about it, right? And so we would say that metal element has this harsh quality, and sure enough, right? You get up in the morning. I just actually came back from the woods of Oregon, and every morning it's been about 30 degrees. Mm-hmm. You wake up and it doesn't really warm up until 10 a.m. And then it cools off as soon as the sun goes down. And then during the day, it's okay. It's pretty pleasant. You're still experiencing the 60s. But the difference in terms of temperature is pretty harsh. And so this is why that, during this time, the low temperature in the morning and evening, this is really about frost, right? So frost is starting to happen. And in nature, you need that for certain productive fruits and produce. You need frost in order for things to sort of be signaled in order to ripen and then get also, return the resources back into the root system. Mm-hmm. And the metal element also corresponds to the respiratory system, our immune system. Mm-hmm. So this is also the time in which the respiratory system gets assaulted. You get colds and flus. This is why colds and flus always starts in the fall, is because this cooling trend will actually, number one, make the viruses active, because viruses have ambient temperatures. Mm-hmm. They need certain temperature to operate. And so when it's cooler than, let's say 65 degrees, the virus begins to activate and they start spreading like crazy. And then to top it off, these temperature differentials really make people very vulnerable. A lot of people don't realize this, but even our semantics of catching a cold, mm-hmm. What does that mean, right? Well, because the cooling weather is actually causing you to get sick. And if you ask a doctor today, a Western medicine doctor, right, mm-hmm. There is no concept of this at all. There's not this understanding that we're actually product of nature, and we react and respond to nature. And so to a Western doc, the temperature change doesn't matter. What causes disease is viruses, bacteria, and so forth. It's very factual. And they're not incorrect in that way, because I have a strong background in Western medicine. I was trained in Western medicine as well. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're missing is that virus and bacteria are around all the time. So why don't we get sick all the time? We get sick because we become vulnerable and weak because of the temperature change, the differential of going from 65 to 30 degrees, And so that's what makes us vulnerable and weakened, and therefore opportunistic infections like a virus or bacteria happens. And it happens when the weather cools down. And so this is a very practical knowledge to understand that the metal element, it corresponds to the immune system and your respiratory system. That's why you need to strengthen the metal element, but not during the fall. You actually need to strengthen it before the fall, right? Because prior to the fall, there is the earth element, that late summer's earth element. Mm-hmm. And so that we have cycles called the productive or creative or generating cycles, right? These all basically means the same thing. It's a mother-child relationship. Earth engenders or gives birth to metal. And so by strengthening the earth element and the metal element at the same time, but the earth element is very critical. And why is that critical? Well, if we look at, earth and what does earth element mean? First and foremost, it's really during this time of harvest. We got to make sure that there's an abundance of that harvest. And then the earth element corresponds to the digestive organs. So that would be stomach, spleen, pancreas, and to a certain degree, your small intestines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, your digestive tract. And what does it mean by strengthening the earth? Well, strengthening the earth means that you have to take care of digestion. Mm-hmm. If you want a strong immune system and resistance against colds and flus in the fall, which is the metal element, you have to strengthen the mother in order to provide the child that extra boost. And by taking care of digestion, the digestive tract, number one, you're increasing absorption of nutrients. Number two, you are directly actually reinforcing the immune system, because 70% of all your immune system is in your gut. I mean, most people don't realize that, but majority of your immune system is actually located in your gut. Right. And all the bacteria, the 15 pounds of bacteria you have in your gut, all either can work for you in a beneficial way or destroy you. If you have the bad bacteria in there. So that's why it's so important to take care of the digestion, this earth element, so that once you do and you have a strong earth, then comes the fall where it changes into the metal phase, not a problem. You're not vulnerable to catching colds and flus. Even if you're surrounded by viruses and bacteria. Come on, not everybody gets sick, but yet we're all exposed. So how do you differentiate that? So my message when I teach Chinese medicine to Western trained physicians is that nature plays a huge role on our health and wellness and our quality of life. So don't forget, we're not, we're not so smart yet as to overcome nature and have zero influence from nature. In fact, what we need to do is learn from nature and adapt to it so that we can survive and thrive. Mm-hmm. And so this is a concept that's so integral to Chinese medicine. And so when we talk about that, then we talk about the ecology of what's happening, the wholesale destruction of our environment and the climate change that has happened as a result of it. We are also seeing tremendous change an increase in illnesses that really weren't as prevalent before the climate change. So we're starting to see these changes happen because of the climate change. And so this is something that we also need to link. And way back 5,000 years ago, there was a book written called The Yellow Emperor's Classic of Medicine. And this is a book that I've taken pains to translate. So the Yellow Emperor's Classic talks about human's relationship with the great ecology. And in order to maintain health and wellness, you really need to understand the cycles of change and how to adapt to these changes. And that's what the 5 elements help us to understand, helps us link to the ecology, the greater environment.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting just going on I have to say early on, I had this thought in my head and of course you and I do these things all the time. I'm like, okay, but what about city bunny me versus you just came from the woods in Portland, and how does it impact, both of us differently? And then you address that in saying, like, it really is these cycles of nature. It doesn't matter whether you're someone who lives in the city or somebody who lives outside of the city. It's the intuitive awareness within yourself that your body understands it's in a different season and it needs to react to that and start to bolster itself to that. I do think it would be interesting, though, to address, because Chris, are you up north right now?
Yes, we're in San Jose right now. Mm-hmm.
So what are you both noticing in those that you're working with right now? Like, what are you noticing happening to them even further in this time, this particular cycle?
So like what Dr. Mao was saying, so up here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we started noticing towards the end of the Indian summer months, more people were coming in with cold and flu-like symptoms, upper respiratory tract symptoms, and phlegm. And this earth element, when it's out of balance, and it can't do its basic function of transforming fluids properly, then those fluids unfortunately turn impure, and then it produces phlegm. And so people were definitely, there's these viruses going around, and then along with that, then it's also then the environment too of what the work life is like as well too. The difference between the Silicon Valley here in Los Angeles, there's such a big difference. We see these young engineers, 25, 26 years old, already with tremors, because their nervous systems are shot because of how many hours that they're working. Yes, they have the fancy house and the nice car, but their nervous system is also playing a role. And like what Dr. Mao was saying, the Su Wen, the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Difficulties, Dr. Mao, your translation, I had to read it very slowly because it's so deep. But basically, like what he's saying right now, yes, as climatic changes are creating illnesses that we normally wouldn't see. And in the Su Wen, would talk about when seasons are out of season. So that's the other thing too to take into account is when the seasons don't act like how they're supposed to because of this climatic change. And so then the diseases that result maybe 1 to 2 seasons later as a result of that. So.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Mao, how do you respond to that, knowing, like, can you go even deeper into this whole issue of climate change and seasons being off? Like, what do we do for our bodies? How do we compensate for that?
Chinese medicine is well positioned to really help offer a bridge of understanding and also potential remedial solutions. So, I'll use the example what we got right now in Southern California, right? So this last weekend, we actually had like 4 fires burning all at once, right? And this is now the new norm because of the change. What's happening is that our summers are now being pushed back. So like this past summer, we actually had a pretty cool temperature-wise summer. So our summer didn't really start until September. And now it's going to extend out to September, October, November. And I wouldn't be surprised by Thanksgiving, it will still be like in the 80s, as an example, during the day. Certainly nighttime are starting to cool down quite a bit, but during the day. And because of this extension, right, so now our fall has characteristic of summer. And that's a problem because now, first and foremost, you got in the environment, it's one of the reasons why the fires, this is now our major fire season. The fires last year, the year before, I mean, the last 5 years have been devastating to California, right? So we've got that going on. Yeah. But we're also seeing some of the some of the things that only happen during the summer being extended into this season. Case in point, mosquitoes. I mean, I will tell you, this year, of all the years, I've seen mosquitoes just thrive. Because I regularly see patients come in, even today, as an example. I'm looking at the bites around their ankle. So what the heck is this? Well, I was working out in the garden and I got bitten by mosquitoes. And not only that, but people hiking in the hills are getting bitten by ticks and then developing Lyme disease. And then what we're also seeing because of this warm weather trend, because again, interestingly, when the weather cools down into the fall and winter, cold viruses become active, flu viruses become active, but many of the typical infections, like what we call vector-borne diseases, are not as prevalent. The vector-borne diseases are diseases that are spread by microorganisms. I mean, organisms such as mosquitoes, ticks. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? Or rats. So rats is another example. You've got a large homeless population, which is unfortunate in LA, that are now actually spreading disease. When in fact the weather was cold, like it's supposed to be in the fall, those diseases are actually controlled. They don't spread as quickly. Vector-borne diseases are known to be very, very much responding to weather patterns, how hot it is. So every microbe has an ambient temperature that they operate in. And so the vector-borne disease seasons actually have been extended. So across America, vector-borne disease such as Lyme disease, West Nile, or Zika, or other kind of insect-borne diseases, what we're seeing is that it's gone up 300% over the last 10, 20 years. And because of the climatic changes that are happening. And so we see ecologically the imbalance that's happening in these elements. We see that a lot. And we're suffering some of the consequences of that in us as humans, because we are beholden to our environment. When the environment changes, we get sick. If we're, we become overwhelmed with this imbalance. So the key to really taking care of yourself, preventing illness, and if you do have illness, how to recover quickly. Number one, learn and recognize that this is not a normal season characteristic. When it's dry, when it's hot, in middle of October, it's not. We're going to be anticipating a lot of problems. So you're adding fire to the metal. So now what you're doing is you're in the control cycle. It's melting the metal. The fire is melting the metal. So the metal element is becoming even weaker because of the characteristics we're seeing, like summer characters in the fall. And so we're going to see more respiratory, for sure, accentuated more respiratory. We're going to see a lot more allergies. We're going to see a lot more heart disease, because fire corresponds to, the heart, circulation, high blood pressure, and we are going to also, as the fire becomes even stronger, right? It can also begin to not only over dominate or control the metal element. Now you're starting to look at cycles where the fire can actually insult, and so what that insulting is the water is a control element of the fire, right? So water usually keeps fire in check. Fire is getting out of control. It now basically insults the what is typically the control cycle. So it insults water. The water, right, represents your kidney, adrenals, your reproductive system, and all those other. And so it has an effect on your also kidneys. And you can then see problems like more lower back pain. You got problem with infertility, reproductive system problems, hormone balance. So a lot of that can happen. And then in the nature, when there is excess fire element represented during this time, you are also insulting literally the water. So you're drying everything up. So the reservoir levels will go down, and there's just simply no moisture in the air at all. So then you create other, compounding other issues. So again, understanding these cycles and how these cycles interact with one another and how they are related. And so when there's something that's off balance, it can really start to affect all the other elements. And again, I just want to emphasize, coming back, in order to stay healthy, having this understanding is useful. And so that what you want to do is prepare yourself. You want to cool and lubricate. And so the diet that you'll be eating would be obviously something with greater moisture in to help you lubricate, moisten the lungs. Like pears are fantastic as an example of something that's moistening of the respiratory system. And then our herbal formula immunity is great in that, again, that strengthens the immune system, but also the respiratory system as well. The metal elements, that's like a metal element formulation. And then, coupled with that, now you got to also think about like, well, how do I subdue this fire? There's a little bit too much fire.
Right.
So then exactly. And then so we would use foods that are cooling. So introducing more cucumber and, in fact, the watermelon you can still get. So that's very cooling as well. So there's a number of other sort of juicy fruits that are very cooling that you can use. And then from an herbal standpoint of view, this is also when we make sure that we are using the right formula. We'll custom formula for patients, or in this case, we have actually the fire element formula, which is actually kind of cooling because it's really meant to keep the fire from, getting out of control. So it'll also help. So in this case, you can go with the fire element, you can go with the metal element, both together, and then strengthen the immunity to help you adapt and get through these changes.
Okay. Thank you. Chris, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, this sequence that Dr. Mao is talking about, this controlling sequence, there's a natural clockwise flow that's supposed to happen, not only within our bodies, but universally as well, too. And it's when, like what you're saying, it's when it becomes out of control, when it starts to dominate. And, one of the examples that I gave in a speech that I gave last week was acid reflux and GERD. The liver is supposed to aid in the digestive system and aid with the stomach. And when it's overpowering that stomach, then we start to see the dysfunction come up, because then what's interesting is that all the energy of the body, there's only one Qi. But what's very clever about the system in itself is that depending on, once it's in the body in particular, what its function is what its description is. So, for example, like stomach Qi is supposed to descend and then transfer some of that energy over to your spleen. Well, if the liver Qi is stuck, because of emotions, poor diet, or seasons being out of season, then it inhibits the stomach Qi from descending. So instead, it ascends, or it gets stuck. If people have the pain in the center of their, at the end of the sternum in the epigastric region. And so, yes, I think that when we look at the seasons being out of season, and then what can we do to remedy that? That's what's so clever about this whole 5-element system, is that it's such a simplistic system that describes complex situations. And I think that's the thing that's so profound about it. And then, like I was just saying a couple of seconds ago, you add in not only the seasonal component and the dietary, but then also you add in the emotional component as well, too. When I give talks to the trauma nurses and doctors, a lot of times the main thing that they talk about is stress, and they just classify stress as just one component. And what's very fascinating about the 5 elements is how there's different types of stress, and how these emotional components actually affect different organs of the body and then show up as disease, or at least lay the foundation also for disease to set in a lot easier. And so if you understand what the emotional component is as well with these 5 elements, and what we can do in order to help to balance those out, because what emotions are good things, because they are the thing that helps, they are our barometer that helps us understand what is going on in our environment. But, like the wood element, anger, resentment, and old anger, for example, is a good emotion to have if it causes you to create change in the world, to stand up, to fight for the underdog, to get out of a bad situation. But like what I tell people, if that anger is imploding or exploding, you're going home and blowing up at the wife and the kids, you start abusing alcohol or drugs, you have road rage, you start developing insomnia, constipation, like I said, acid reflux, or even depression, then no longer is that anger serving you, and this further creates another discord. And the 5 element scheme is a way in all 3 cycles to help to understand, okay, well, what's going on here, and how can I actually use these different schemes in order to counteract or to balance out the whole organism.
Mm-hmm. Very, very true. And thank you for sharing an example of that with, for instance, wood as well. I think that's important for everyone to receive as many examples as they can as they're tuning in tonight. On that note, Dr. Mao, perhaps, you can expand on this, because in addition to the things that we see happening within nature, it does influence our emotions and also our sense of spirituality. Like, what is our purpose being here, and how does our purpose evolve as we grow through our life experiences too?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the purpose, because so often when we see patients in a clinical setting, so much of the illness stems from people feeling lost. Mm-hmm. They really feel lost. They're emotionally deflated, discouraged, depressed, anxious. And so much of it stems from the fact that, number one, they don't have a true knowledge of themselves. And number two, they don't know why they exist. And so that sense of lost and no connection creates a lot of angst and therefore illness. Mm-hmm. And so in order to help people understand this, this is why I wrote the book, Live Your Ultimate Life. And it's really first and foremost to have that understanding of who you are, and then understand that you have all the 5 elements. The same things that happen in nature happens in you as well. But there is one element that we tend to become dominant in. And so therefore you need to understand and know what strength you derive from that element on a daily basis and your personality. And then leverage that as your gift to define your purpose of what's meaningful to you and why you would bother to live your life pursuing this particular, purpose or meaning. So that really gives people a good connection and foundation to what's really fundamental to life. And once you have that, then you can utilize this 5-element concept, this understanding, this paradigm in every aspect of your life, be it interrelationship with others, at work, career, and for your health. Obviously, I've got a workshop coming up in a couple weeks in Detroit that I'll be teaching to acupuncturists on the 5 elements, but it's more feng shui based. So we are going to explore all the ways in which you can use the 5 elements from a feng shui standpoint of view, which is placement of your work and your home. But the applications are immense, and so I encourage everybody, if you haven't read the book or used the book, it's a really good way to get to know yourself and figure out why you're here.
I love the book. I mean, there's just so many good tidbits in there for understanding yourself, understanding your relationship to other people, and how you communicate with other individuals, whether it be in your direct relationship or your family, your friends, and then understanding your environment in different scenarios too, whether it be in a professional sense, such as with work, or whether it be how you actually tune out of what's going on around you and get yourself centered, and what are your rituals, whether that be, meditating, whether it be doing feng shui in your home and having that flow of energy movement within your home. And then of course, modalities such as Qi Gong. And that actually brings me to my next point. Chris, why don't you talk about the basis of movement, since you are so avidly involved in Qi Gong? Talk about why movement is important to our bodies.
Well, yes, there's there's different forms of qigong, and there's actually three schools of qigong, which is the medical school, the martial arts school, and then the spiritual school. And the spiritual school doesn't have to be any ism. It's really just understanding that you are responsible for your life, that you are responsible for this continual introspection and self-study to refine yourself. But yes, movement is key, and the analogy that I like to give to clients is like a stagnant body of water. What happens? That stagnant body of water, it becomes disease. Same thing happens if you do not move. Disease will set in, and so these organs need to move. Deep breath work, which is one of the foundations of qigong, because there's three regulations of qigong, which is also the foundation of tai chi, which is breath, posture, mind intent, and the breath being able to remember or to retrain ourselves to pull the breath into the lower abdomen, in particular about 1 inch below the belly button. Because when we don't breathe deeply, then the massage work that comes about, the internal massage work, as I like to say, ceases. And so then that also can create discord within the organ system themselves. So these gentle movements and guided meditations, no matter how simplistic they are, they're all meant to do something medicinally inside the body. There's not one thing that we're teaching that's just for relaxation. Relaxation is a byproduct, but what we're really after is this idea of refinement and increasing the functionality of these internal organs, because I think for most of us, we just take things for granted. Like we recognize our heart and our stomach, the heart beats and the stomach helps digest. But, these organs, we understand the physiology according to science, but in Chinese medicine and Chinese philosophy, they have a much, much, much greater functionality. And this idea of this interconnectedness, like what Dr. Mao was talking about, like right now with this summer heat continuing on and then extinguish or melting the metal and injuring the lungs, and then also potential for heart problems and injuring the kidneys as well too. So there is this interconnectedness that happens. And so with these gentle movements and the guided meditation is to help to empower people to become aware of their body. In the Su Wen in Mao's book, there's a passage that I really love, and it says to fight disease after disease sets in is like digging a well after one has become thirsty, or forging one's weapons after engaging in battle. Wouldn't that be too late? So the whole idea here is to empower people to be able to understand how their health or the potential for a full for health and vitality, and even if they are fighting a disease or they are suffering from an illness, that how these practices can actually help to enhance, to change the process of that disease. And yes, we understand that there are these viruses and bacterias, but then once it's in the body, what is it doing? What is it actually doing to us? How is it affecting the different organs? And how can we use a combination of Qigong practices, diet and nutrition, Tai Chi, herbology, Feng Shui, in order to be able to help us become and live the healthy, happy life that we all deserve to have. And, they say that people are supposed to live to be 120 years old. And what that means to me is that's living 120 years and dying a graceful death, not suffering till the day you die. And the whole idea of the Qigong too, like we have a meditation called the Center and Balance meditation. And what I love about Qigong is that it encompasses both the yin and yang aspects, yin aspect of more the mindfulness, and the yang aspect where we're actually consciously doing something to enhance our overall well-being. And the whole purpose of the Center and Balance meditation, for example, is for you, number one, to get out of your head and back into your body. But number two, for you to become so aware of your body that you can sense disease before disease sets in. In some of the classical textbooks, there's a passage that says the superior doctor is one that can prevent disease before disease sets in. So the idea here is that you become your own superior doctor, meaning that you are aware enough, are in tune enough with your body to where you can feel when something's out of balance before it actually shows up as a symptom or a sign. And then from there, then what happens is that, and this is something that we don't normally talk about, my book is called Qigong for Self-Refinement because it's refining yourself. So regardless of what your spiritual or religious belief structure is, if you continue to cultivate yourself and refine and let go of these imbalances and these emotional traumas and hurts, and then increase the functionality of these internal organs, then what happens is your vibration overall changes too. And when that vibration changes, you can't help but to grow spiritually, even if you don't even talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm looking at the time, everyone, and I would say right now, if you haven't submitted a question, this would be a good time to do so, because we want to be conscious that everyone's time is valuable. And we're so enjoying tonight that I have a feeling we could go on for a couple of hours and just keep going. In the meantime, as we're waiting for questions, Dr. Mao, why don't you explain to us what the difference is between simply relieving pain and actually eliminating pain within ourselves, that source?
Well, on the surface, relieving pain is you temporarily reduce or eliminate the sensation of the actual pain signals itself. And you can do that very effectively with over-the-counter medication, sometimes the NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, or opioids, right? The only problem is that you're not really getting at the cause of the pain, you're just masking it. And not only that, many of these substances can be addictive, such as the Oxycontins, and we're seeing a lot of the consequences. What's happening now is that millions of people are hooked on these drugs, and they have a hard time getting off. Mm-hmm. And yet they really don't get to the source. The source of the pain. When the body has pain, it's really a signal to you, like, hey, something's not right here. So it's a warning signal. It's like a brake light coming on, brake warning light coming on. You're driving down the highway, and taking a medication to mask it is akin to just getting out a hammer and just breaking the light so that you don't see it and you continue to drive. That's essentially what's happening. Eventually, you're going to get in trouble, because when you actually have to stop and use the brake and the brake has failed, you're going to have tremendous injury. And that's what happens. We see that time and time again. People are living with pain or chronic pain. They don't deal with the source. And now they got a bigger problem because they've allowed that what was a signal, what was a warning light, to now represent something even more serious, right? And so getting at the root of it is really what Chinese medicine is about. We recognize pain is really a blockage and stagnation of energy flow, qi. So mm-hmm. Qi is blocked, then there's pain, and pain is just a way to communicate that is blocked. You need to find out why. So it's the reason physical. Is there actual blood pooling? Is there an actual bruise? Is there inflammation, swelling, and all that? Or is it something, something else altogether? Is the pain maybe referred from somewhere else? Let's say someone's got leg pain, but actually the problem is a herniated disc pressing on the nerve in the lower back. So they really have to get to the root cause of that. But a lot of times, again, the modern medicine's way of approach to pain is, let's just get rid of it for you. You don't feel it, so that's good. But in Chinese medicine, we investigate of why. There's also pain.
Uh-oh.
Hang on, let me just switch my earbuds. All right. Am I on yet?
Okay.
All right, so the emotionally induced pain, right? So emotionally induced pain could be from a depression or a trauma that has caused the actual energy blockage. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of pain could be an abdominal pain that after number of scans and tests and colonoscopy and everything, you can't find any physiological reason why there's pain. But patients comes in with pain, severe pain, double over pain. And these are kind of pain that may be associated with emotional traumatic pain that now has rooted itself in the abdominal area, particularly the liver channel and so forth. So again, what we want to do is identify where the root is, and let's try to help you clear it. Let's help you release and help you heal and recover from the trauma, so then the pain can be eased. And so there are techniques that we use. Of course, acupuncture is one. herbal therapy, body work. Of course, we love to teach patients on how to, empower themselves to heal. And that's where the Qi Gong comes in. We regularly actually work with patients one-on-one and give them the Qi Gong that they need in order to participate in their own healing process. And we find it much more effective when patients are engaged in the healing process together with the practitioner, because now they take ownership. And when they take ownership, then we now have an ability to first accept, then change, and then the outcome is achieved. And so it's a nice healing partnership. That's what we strive to do. So, Qigong is wonderful, and it's supplemental to what we do, but we also view it as a tremendous empowering tool for self-healing. And so it's something that, I'm very happy to see that Chris is doing really well in his Qigong training and classes, and we need more effort and people like Chris out there to really take this knowledge and this practice far and wide to everybody. It needs to be accessible by everybody.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you. We actually have a question, please, which both of you can respond to. If we're deficient in our element, is it better to take herbs for our element or for the parent element, or both, to support and strengthen the element? Do you want me to repeat that?
Hang on. I need to, because I lost my earbuds. Now I need to, okay, let's try that again. I think I can hear that better now.
Okay. If we are deficient in our element, is it better to take herbs for our element or for the parent element, or both, to support and strengthen that element?
I would do both, because again, if you're looking to strengthen a deficient element, of course the obvious answer would be, well, then directly strengthen that element. But you have to also realize that nourishment is drawn from the mother, so you have to also go to the mother element to strengthen the mother, so there's more to give. I think of breastfeeding. If I can help the mother get stronger and produce more milk, well, there's more for the baby. Mm-hmm. The baby will get stronger as a result.
Great analogy. Chris, what would you like to add to that?
Yes, I would agree. And you could even go from the controlling cycle as well, too, the grandparent-child relationship, because just like we have in our society nowadays, at least I see around me, the parent's too weak sometimes to take care of the child, so the grandparent steps in. But then, looking at these three sequences can actually help us understand more fully how we could apply the herbs or diet change, feng shui changes as well too, and then implementing Qigong practices in order to create that balance. And I don't know if this is a segue or not, but one of the things, one of the great things about Chinese medicine is there's so many tools of assessment, and like what Dr. Mao was saying is, our typology. What is our primary typology? We could be a combination of typologies, but then it's really recognizing the deviation from the typologies. And what's interesting too is that it's not only the deviations of the typologies, but it's also looking at the face, because also the face is broken down into the 5 elements as well too. Not only the facial shape will tell us the personality typology, but different areas of the face will tell us, and certain lines or certain features will further go on and tell us how we think, and also what emotional traumas are still lying dormant within the tissues. And then this is where working with, especially with these infinity herbs, really helps to pull us back into that alignment with what our power really is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Actually, so that brought up another question where an individual was asking, is it better to be completely balanced as one element And are you that element for your lifetime, or does that segue? So both of you can respond to that. But then I also realized with Chris's question about wrinkles, let's give them an example, like forehead wrinkles. What does that mean?
Okay, so there's some, believe it or not, there's some lines and some features that we want to see, and forehead wrinkles we want to see. The reason why is because when those lines that go across the forehead, if they connect, that means that the person has learned from their life circumstance. If you pay attention to people whose lines are kind of broken, they don't really connect, those are the people that are always saying, why does this always happen to me? Why do I find the same guy over and over and over again? It's because they never learn from their life experiences. So some of those lines we actually do, especially across the forehead, we do want to see, because it tells us that the person has actually learned from their life experiences, which is a good thing.
So I love my wrinkles now. I love my jade rollerball too.
Yes, we have one of those too.
Every individual should own a jade rollerball. Okay, Dr. Mao, do you want to add to that? Not my wrinkles.
Well, the wrinkles, Chris has, addressed that nicely. Yeah. Now, in terms of
Element.
Yes. So, as far as element goes, right? So, are you locked in? Is it? You're born with it? I'll tell you, there's a difference, right? There's the astrological element that you're born with. Unfortunately, you can't change that, right? That's it. You're a certain element, and that's sort of like the time and space in which you came into this world. That is set. However, that doesn't necessarily represent your personality element in your life. You develop these personality elements over time. And so usually by the time you're in your late teens, you already kind of formed your personality. And majority of people, with that elemental personality will most likely stay true in the rest of their lives, unless they consciously try to cultivate themselves and change, right? Let's say if you're wood element, you find yourself, really dominant in the wood element. And as I mentioned earlier, we possess all 5 elements. There's just one that stands out, and that's the one that defines us the most. And we react to the world based on that. So let's say you're wood element, you're driven, you're authoritative, and you're just, really impatient, trying to get things done. And you do experience a good deal of success because you're driven. However, but you also create a lot of conflict around you because you are very impatient and you're so goal-oriented that you forget the human element, right? So it creates a lot of unnecessary interpersonal conflicts, as well as in your relationship, in your marriage, and whatever it might be. And so then you decide, well, I have this element of wood that's kind of helped me get to where I am today, but it's not serving me because my relationships are teetering on failing. What do I need to do? Self-reflection and really taking that into consideration and to want to, right? So there has to be desire to say, okay, I identify with this element, but I really need to take the rough edges off. So what do I need to do, right? So in this case, you can do one of two things, right? You can say, okay, I've got some traits that I like, and I want to get rid of that. But how do I soften the other traits, right? So what I can do is I can look to my child, right, which is the earth element, right? I mean the fire element. So wood produces fire. So I can look at the fire element and I can strengthen my fire element. And it's interesting part about fire element is that fire element is very heart-based, right? It corresponds to the heart. It's very emotional. It's very sensitive to other people's feelings and needs and so forth. So you take someone who's literally can act like a bulldozer, right? Because they're so oriented to someone, like cultivating the aspect of them that's considerate and thoughtful and loving and emotionally connecting with somebody. That would be cultivating more fire element, right? So you're strengthening that fire element. That's the child, which is pulling some of that energy, excess energy away from that wood element. You can also look to the controlling cycle here, and look at the metal element. The metal, remember the metal image of metal kind of shaping and sculpting the wood. So the metal. So what is the metal? Well, metal is the more methodical, approach to life, and so strengthening that in order to take down some of the excesses of the wood is also good too in that way, right? So now you've got these traits that are going to serve you really well. For one, you still have this driven, motivated, and take charge and want to get things done, which is invaluable. I want someone to be on my team that's got wood element. But if I can then get this person to have a little more sensitivity, emotional sensitivity, connect with people on a heart level, that really round off the edges there, right? And so now they can be inspirational and touch people's heart, as opposed to dictator who says, if you don't do this, I am going to do this to you, right? So the approach is very different. Then you look over to the metal element, which the methodical aspect of really organizing and putting, importantly, the horse before the cart, not the cart before the horse, because sometimes in the impatience of the wood element, they just want to get it done, so they just bulldoze, and they put the cart in front of the horse. So there needs to be a process. So the metal element is very process driven. So you got process in place, you've got the heart connection, emotional connection, and being thoughtful and considerate with other people. And then you also got the drive and the motivation to take charge. Think about that, right? That would really smooth your edges, all your rough edges, and it really make you a wood element that is not excessive, but rather really balanced, right? And so this is why the value proposition of the 5 elements is that, yes, you may be one element at this time in life, but who do you want to be? And it's up to you. You have the power to change, and we give you the tools to change. And that's the beauty of it, is that we have the power to change. And if we change, then our life changes, and that's really the powerful message here, is that if you can change yourself, you can change your life. And really, it's that simple, right? The life is a reflection. Your life is a reflection of who you are today. So if you change yourself today, your life would be different.
Thank you for that. I know we have run over. There's one more question that came in. Do you both mind if we respond to one more question before we wrap up?
Sure, I'm fine.
Pretty much have everybody still on with us. They don't want to go. Okay, so the last question for the evening is, how do we choose the correct Qigong practices to heal from trauma? We didn't touch on trauma that much, so I do understand why this would be important.
So we have a very simple trauma release technique. It's called acute release technique.
Right.
And it combines using specific master points of acupoints and using just touch. And then a process work, which is laid out actually in my book, Live Your Ultimate Life. And it's more powerful if you're able to do it with someone who can sort of be there to hold safe space for you to begin to express and let go of the incident, the memory, and the feeling around it. And it's extremely powerful. We do this all the time in workshops as well as in clinical setting, and it really helps people really clear that that reactions that they keep having whenever they're reminded of the trauma.
Okay, thank you. And Chris, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, and I would go also and say that whatever, if they can identify what the trauma is too, because if they can identify the trauma, then we know what element or what organ system to work with in order to release that, and then that's where you would do one of the specific 5-element Qigong practices. For example, even though our nose represents the lungs, the tip of our nose actually represents the fire element in the heart. And, if there's a line bisecting the nose here, it's an indicator, no matter how fine that line is, it's an indicator of a broken heart. So the trauma is a broken heart. Maybe a father left that home, or a mother left, or somebody passed away. If we understand what the trauma is, then we could actually pinpoint it to the organ disharmony. And going back to the heart itself, now the heart is the emperor, empress of the body. This is where our consciousness is. It dictates how much of an emotion will be expressed or suppressed. And so really, looking at the heart as the emperor, empress of the body, and then also looking at what kind of trauma are we talking about? Is it fear-based? Is it anxiety? Is it resentment? Is it shame? Is it guilt? Is it loss? What is it?
Mm-hmm. And the beauty of it is, again, everyone, there is that opportunity for change, to release it and move forward. Okay. Correct. I am so appreciative to you both, as I am quite sure our audience is, but I think that it is time to wrap up. We're 15 minutes over, so I hope that all of our viewers have truly enjoyed this. Before we go, Chris, do you want to share one more piece of wisdom that you would like for everyone to be aware of?
A lot of people say that I don't have time to meditate. I can't meditate, and my mind is going 90 miles a minute. And my answer to that is that if you can worry, you can meditate. You're just focusing on something negative. So start off your day, even if it's something like before you get up, like taking a conscious breath and just examining your body, or maybe even something as simple as writing out 10 things that you're grateful for, or just stating it to yourself. Because if you start off your day that way, you will change the trajectory of the rest of your day. And when we look at disease in itself, it's not only our environmental factors, but it's also our perceptions on life. And one of the great things about being a human being is that we can reinvent ourselves at any time.
Very, very true. Thank you. And Dr. Mao, what would you like to have us close off with?
Well, what I hope for the takeaway is that people realizing that there's so much wisdom in the ancient Taoist philosophy and the way of life, such as understanding our relationship within ourselves, others, and the environment through the 5-element paradigm. Mm-hmm. And there's so much more there, obviously, including an entire healing system. And I just would like to invite everybody out there listening, maybe you're a beginner or you're just hearing for the first time, to really explore, because ultimately the more you learn, the more it will make your life better. And that's what we're really here to do, is we're here to help facilitate the betterment so that you can live your best life ultimately. So
thank you, and I entirely agree with that. To all of our audience, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for staying on for this episode from front to end. It's amazing to see how many of you were on tonight. So we hope you enjoy a wonderful evening. If you have further questions, you're always welcome to submit them to myself, which is marketing@infinichi.com. And I will forward those to Dr. Mao as well as to Chris and Parisa. And we hope you will continue to tune in to our wellness chats that we do on Tao Wellness, as well as for Chris to the events that he does through his practice. So enjoy a wonderful evening. Thank you again, Dr. Mao and Chris. And we're just so appreciative. Always, always. We love being here to be able to educate all of you. Take care, enjoy, and live your best life now too. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.